Welcome to How Not to DM. I'm your host, Derek. Thanks for joining me on my quest to interview the very best dungeon masters on this plane of existence. Keith Ammann is the author of the popular D&D 5e blog, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, which breaks down the stat blocks of all the creatures in the monster manual and how you might best use them in combat encounters. The blog's popularity led to Keith writing a series of books on the subject, including Live to Tell the Tale for player tactics, and most recently, How to Defend Your Lair, talking about dungeon, stronghold, and other structures and their purposes and layouts to make your players think strategically. Enjoy!
I first got into role-playing games pretty early age. I found out about Dungeons & Dragons from the September-October 1979 issue of Games magazine. Told my mom about it. She bought me the Holmes Blue Box set. We opened it up. Could not figure out what to do with it. It took me several more years before I got together with a group of friends who had figured out their way around the system and were playing the game for realsies. And so even though I had the basic D&D set, I really jumped right into AD&D with both feet. From there, went to Villains and Vigilantes, Shadowrun. I was an early adopter of Shadowrun, first edition, second edition. The third edition of that game came out just as I was sort of starting not to have time in my life for a lot of role-playing gaming and moved away from where I went to college, and so didn't really have a group. And yeah, so I was out of it for a long time, went more into board gaming for quite a few years, then came back to role-playing gaming with third edition GURPS, and came to 5th edition D&D right around the time it came out, when my wife asked me to DM a group for her and some of her coworkers. So that's where I re-entered the D&D time stream.
Yeah, it was fun to read that in the intro of your book, kind of the full circle you made all the way back to 5th edition. And also, it's just kind of fun to hear about other people wanting to play at work, because that's how I started. My coworkers were sitting around and a few of them were talking about this game they were playing. And I said, well, this sounds really fun. You know, what is this? And they invited me along, and that's really how I got introduced to. So it's fun to hear other people doing that too.
It's funny, I was actually going to just run a fantasy campaign for these people using GURPS, and my wife sat me down and said, no, they want to play Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to play Dungeons and Dragons. I said, okay. So I went out and got the rules, and the funny thing is, now you look back at GURPS 3rd edition, 4th edition, and they seem so dated. That kind of crunch has really gone out of style hard.
Yeah, there's a few people out there who really love the crunchy games, you know. I've played a few different games. I don't feel like I've played any that are super crunchy yet. I wonder if I'd like them, being that I work with numbers and stuff all day and I kind of like that stuff. But I also, it's kind of nice to escape that and do a lot of more of like the role play and that kind of thing too. So I can see, there's room for both types of games, certainly. But yeah, I think you're right. There's definitely a shift towards more flexible and more role play focused games. Yeah. Do you recall the very first game you ran? Was that with that group in school, that, you know, those friends that you made, or was it later on? And do you remember kind of how it went?
Oh yeah, it was with my school friends. So around the end of high school, I fell in with a D&D group of 4 people, myself and 3 friends. My good friend Julian, who I'm still very close to today, was the first dungeon master of that group, and then we rotated through us.
Mm-hmm.
So my friend Matt DM'd second, Byrne DM'd third, I batted cleanup. We rotated the DMing, and we had a group of 4 PCs, but whenever one of us was DMing, we ran our own PC as an NPC. And so we did 2 rotations of that before. I guess it was more like 1.5 rotations of that. I think we played 6 adventures total with that group. and before we all went our separate ways.
Yeah, so each of you would kind of pick up after the end of a kind of story arc and then start something else. Yeah.
Right. Well, we played the same characters. It
Mhm.
was the same party, and we just rotated through DMing for that party.
Yeah.
Although at the end of my adventure, I actually had my PC do a heel turn and wrote him out of the story and changed PCs. I also game mastered Shadowrun when we were playing that in college. In fact, I think I probably did the most game mastering of that Shadowrun group. There were two of us who did it, and I think I did the lion's share.
Mhm. So the question that, is kind of the focal point of the show, the thing that I really love asking people is the worst mistakes you feel like you've made running games. And this can be specific instances or big kind of overarching problems or, issues that you encountered. The reason I love asking is because I love talking to people who, a lot of us in the community might look up to as, I don't know if I want to say experts, but people whose advice we rely on when we're kind of thinking about things for our own games. And I love just figuring out and finding out all the things that you've done wrong too, that helps humanize you. And but yeah, so are there any that kind of stick out in your mind, specific or broad, that you want to share with us?
I have a lot of years under my belt with this, and so a lot of the simple mechanical stuff I can pretty much do on autopilot. But I would say the big mistake that I have made in the past, and the not terribly distant
Yeah.
past, is overscripting adventures, so that the players have only only one viable path through the story. I've come to recognize that I write the adventures in a looser way now, and allow more different ways to get to the same important beats, and not trying to put so many beats in each adventure, but just keeping them shorter, more flexible, and allowing for the possibility that they might go in crazy unpredictable directions.
As players are wont to do. Yeah. Do you feel like that could be partially a side product of your love of designing encounters and making them really meaningful and interesting? Or do you think they're kind of separate things?
No, I think it has more to do with wanting to tell a story.
Mm,
And what I do is related to that because, I have my friend Julian, who is wildly creative, very original, comes up with unbelievable stuff. And I don't have that same kind of fertile imagination that he has. So if I want to impress him, I have to compete in a different
yeah.
category. And what I go for is trying to make the world feel as real and convincing as possible. That is what connects more directly with what I do in terms of monster analysis.
Uh-huh.
But that in itself comes out of a role playing place, that comes out of wanting to inhabit the creatures, inhabit the world, and use them to tell a story. And
That makes sense.
so I think that impulse is where the overscripting tendency definitely came from.
Mm. All right. Now, on the flip side of that question, what are some of your favorite memories of things that have gone well, improvisation, combat, role playing, etc., that are memories that you all still fondly recall and recant?
So when I was for my wife and her coworkers, that group, which is still my main group, we did Lost Mine of Phandelver, segued from that directly into the Tyranny of Dragons arc, Horde of the Dragon Queen, and Rise of Tiamat. And in addition to the main story, which is both very linear and geographically all over the place, there's a lot of travel. Every episode of that adventure takes place someplace else, which makes it very conducive for inserting PC specific side
Mm.
quests. And so our campaign ran 6 years because I kept inserting side quests for everybody. Everyone got their own side quest. For my wife, whose character was a dwarf ranger who had been the chief of her own village until she abdicated, heard news of various simultaneous disasters taking place there and went back to see what she could do to help. And the village had been partially buried by a mudslide, which also took down part of the palisade fence. And as a result, they were vulnerable to these raids by goblinoids. There were various things going on. Her younger sister was now the chief and had been thrust into that role without expecting it and was unprepared for the job and was still trying to get her legs as a leader. And so there's a lot going on here. Also, it was a very traditionalist, very caste bound society. So a couple of the beats in this adventure were raids by the goblinoids, and they came being led by some hobgoblins and organized by some hobgoblins, and they had built mangonels that they were using to launch flaming projectiles to set buildings in the village on fire. So one of these fights begins with a flaming projectile going straight through the roof of the Temple of Baranar and setting it on fire. Now, partially, I wrote this episode thinking our druid has been preparing create and destroy water again and again and again and never gets any opportunity to cast it. Finally, she will have an opportunity to cast this spell. She didn't prepare it.
Of course.
She was right there by the temple and had not prepared this spell, so it's on fire and she has no way of putting it out. So she decides instead to cast daylight because this raid is happening at night and some of the PCs in the party don't have dark vision, so she wants to help them. And then she wants to get to the wall as fast as possible where the fighting is, so she wild shapes into a giant eagle and flies there. Basic sensible response to a situation where she can't do anything where she is. But I started thinking, okay, so how are the people who see this happen going to interpret it?
Mm.
And in particular, what if they don't see the whole thing? And you know, when you are a druid, of course, and you wild shape, all of your gear changes shape with you. She had cast daylight on her shield, but as soon as she became the eagle, the shield became part of her. So after the goblin raid, which they successfully repel, the next day there's this very somber scene in which the dwarves are burying their dead. And what the PCs realize as they're listening to the funeral service is that instead of calling Baranar the All-Mother and all of the traditional epithets that are associated with her, people are starting to refer to her as Firebird. And as it turns out, several of the villagers had witnessed, once the Temple of Baranar caught fire, their goddess rising from the flames in the form of a radiant eagle and flying to the wall to help her people survive the onslaught and save the day. And so because of what the druid did, these dwarven villagers now think that they saw an avatar of Baranar come to them in their time of need. And my wife turned to the druids player and said, "You broke my people's religion."
I was gonna say, it sounds like she broke the first rule of the Prime Directive, right? Like like a Star Trek thing. But yeah, very funny. Yeah.
One of the things that has always stood out to me as a great way to put more realism in the game is to really think about what everyone knows. Those discrepancies are really interesting to me. What do the players know? What do the NPCs and the monsters know? What do they not know that the other group does? And how do people act based on incomplete or incorrect information? I love exploring what happens to people's decisions or NPCs or monsters' decisions when they don't have all the information, or when the information they have is incorrect, or when they have the upper hand information wise, when they know something that you don't. And I just love thinking about that angle whenever there's a moment, when there's an opportunity for something to happen. I want to think about how people are going to respond based on their own awareness.
Yeah. It does kind of take a lot of work, and I feel like the more you've kind of fleshed out the world in your head, the easier it becomes to kind of do that on the fly. But it is a big part of making the world feel real, like you said, and it's definitely a skill that you've got to develop to really kind of build that experience for your players. Yeah, that's funny. I thinking about like the villagers, right? You hear a big crash or an explosion, you run and open the door, and that's what you see. You don't see the projectile, you see the aftermath, and of course you're going to draw conclusions. Yeah, so that's awesome.
Mhm. In another one of the side quests, our barbarian came from a village in the Ten Towns, the Ragged Glacier, where which had been wiped out by a warlord. And her side quest was all about this warlord coming back and trying to subdue all of the Uthgard barbarian tribes and join them together so that he could make himself a king. And there were various, different set piece battles between the PC and the barbarians that they had been able to recruit to their own side versus this warlord and his own forces. And in one of these, the warlord sent an assassin to take his enemy leader out. But the assassin went for the one who seemed like the obvious leader. He went for the paladin. Never occurred to him that the barbarian, one of many other barbarians, might have been the one organizing this. No, it had to be the paladin, right? They got to be following this guy. And so the assassin goes after the paladin, steals his magic sword. Of course, the paladin is not dead because the assassin did not finish the job. And, now everybody's got a reason to just hate the guy. But, little mistakes like that
Right.
add a little bit of convincingness narratively.
Yeah, I like that. Do you feel like there are any particular people who have been a really big influence on the way you run games? And in particular, I mean, at the beginning, was it kind of the friends that you saw running games? I know a lot of people who started playing way before there were streams and podcasts and everything to listen or watch. It's kind of the people around you. But when you started up again, too, I'm interested to know if you kind of looked for any specific sources to give you inspiration.
In the early years, I didn't really have anyone to base my style off of other than my immediate friends. And for a long, long time, my style was pretty much just sui generis,
Yeah.
because I had nobody else to watch in action. Nowadays, in the streaming era, I've watched a lot of hours of Critical Role and stolen a lot of little tricks from Matthew Mercer. I don't do everything the way he does. I don't think it's necessarily something I need to do everything the way he does. But he has also been doing this for a very, very long time and has his own tricks, his own techniques that he uses. The way he keeps track of initiative and like asks people to call it out in numbered groups. I took that. Some of the things he does in terms of description, in terms of having little, nugget sized side missions. I think that indirectly is how I learned about what I later came to know as the 5 room dungeon. So, you can always look at people. You can look at anybody DMing and either find something to imitate or see something that they're doing that you want to avoid
Yeah.
in yourself. Every other DM that we watch is a teacher for us.
Agreed. All right, let's kind of transition to your work now. So, you're best known for your blog and book series, The Monsters Know What They're Doing. So, tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea and then how it has kind of morphed and changed over time into what it is currently.
It basically started as learning in public. When I first ran Lost Mine of Fandelver, I felt like those first two combat encounters against the goblins
Mm,
were missing something. They didn't feel immersive enough to me. And I recognized that what was happening was I did not have a fully formed mental concept of what goblins were supposed to be like.
yeah,
In AD&D, they were very poorly fleshed out. And in fact, most of your kind of basic cannon fodder humanoid types were very poorly fleshed out back then. There wasn't a lot to distinguish one from another. And so I wanted to make sure, for my own purposes, that I really, got what being a goblin was all about. And I did that by closely reading the stat block line by line and trying to figure out the implications of every aspect of the stat block.
yeah. Very
And
clever idea, by the way. I hadn't ever thought about it this way until one of my previous guests, Josie, who runs a podcast called Short Quest Long Rest. She raved about your book middle of last year and said, "Oh, the way he breaks down the stat blocks and looks at each of them and kind of decides how the monster would act based on that." And I don't know, it was like a total paradigm shift in the way I thought about things too, even before I started reading it. But yeah, it very, very clever.
so, long story short, I had this sort of personal epiphany right around the same time that I was looking to do more regular independent writing and had decided to start a blog. And my bugbear, so to speak, all these years as a writer has always been trying to figure out what to write about. And at that particular moment, I thought, if I need this, maybe other people are gonna enjoy this exercise too.
Yeah.
And so I just made that the subject of the blog, and then it turned out to be something that a lot of people appreciated and grew from there.
Yeah, and so now you've published your third book about this particular
Mhm.
subject. More monsters know what they're doing. And so yeah, it's been a lot of fun to kind of see the different things you're thinking of. The book in between, of course, is
Live to tell the tale.
the cover is all of them around the table, recounting their tales, which I thought was a really clever cover. Yeah,
God, I love that
yeah,
cover.
it's a
I
good
I
one.
love that cover. I took the concept to the artist, and the artist just knocked it out of the
Yeah.
park. That illustration is my mouse pad now in my
Oh, that's
office.
cool. That's really cool. Yeah. So tell us about each of your books, just like a little snippet about what people can expect from them, and including your latest.
The Monsters Know What They're Doing: Combat Tactics for Dungeon Masters is the basic volume. It covers the monster manual and the what I think of as the follow-up volume is the new one, More Monsters Know What They're Doing, which covers the creatures in Volo's Guide to Monsters and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes.
Hmm.
Now, if you go to Amazon or whatever, and it identifies the Monsters Know What They're Doing series, which is a decision my publisher made. I'm not sure I would have made the exact same choice,
Right.
but they call Live to Tell the Tale number 2 in the series and More Monsters number 3. But I think of Live to Tell the Tale as being sort of alongside and adjacent to the other two rather than part of a whole with them, because the other two books, The Monsters Know and More Monsters, are very specifically DM facing, and Live to Tell the Tale is player facing.
Hmm.
But when I wrote The Monsters Know What They're Doing, both the blog and the book, and people started writing to me and saying, "Wow, this is great advice. I got my first total party kill." And I thought, "Oh, that is not what I was trying to accomplish with this." That's when it dawned on me that when the monsters do know what they are doing, if the players don't know what they're doing, then those monsters can become significantly more deadly,
Yes.
especially those goblins, because once you figure out what goblins really are all about, suddenly they become extremely nasty and extremely formidable. And unless you can beat them at their own game, they are very, very hard to beat.
Yeah, they are.
But there are certain other monsters too, like shadows in particular, very, very deadly if players don't know how to use their own abilities to their highest and best. So I decided, yeah, I need to write something for the players to balance the scales, and that's what Live to Tell the Tale is. And now I've been compared to an arms dealer who's selling to both sides.
Yeah, I mean, hey, that's not a bad way. Not a bad way to make some money, I guess. So you mentioned shadows as kind of a really frightening monster if played well. Do you have an absolute favorite monster in either of the editions, either of the books you've written, based on abilities, flavor, lore, that makes them really compelling and interesting?
I have a sentimental favorite, and the sentimental favorite is the Bodak.
Mm,
And the reason why that is my sentimental favorite is because in that side quest, the barbarian side quest, where the party are going around trying to recruit all of the different Uthgard tribes to their side, one of the tribes was suspicious and hesitant and a little xenophobic and said, "We're not going to help you unless you take care of a problem for us." And the problem was this quote unquote spook that lived somewhere out in the woods, and they were sending warriors after it to get rid of it, and those warriors weren't coming back. So take care of the spook, and we'll think about joining you. And I needed something of a particular challenge level that had that particular flavor, that was going to be an unfamiliar thing that players wouldn't necessarily be able to identify. Because one thing I learned a long, long time ago is that you can really up the tension in an encounter by not telling the players what it is they're fighting.
yes.
And the less they know about it, the scarier it is. And back in the day of our group of four, just before I ran my turn in the cycle, I did a little quickie one person thing for each of the other three players and then brought them all together on mine. And what I did for one of them, my friend Matt, was simply they had to fight a troll. But it was a Paul Anderson troll. It was the loathsome limbs troll from the Monster Manual, the kind where you cut off its limbs and the limbs keep writhing around on the ground and fighting you. And the only way you can stop them is by burning them. And so I had Matt and a couple of NPCs with him fight a troll, but didn't tell him what it was he was fighting, and just told him how it acted. And he loved it. He thought that was great. And so I wanted to do the same thing for my players in this side adventure. And I needed something, and I had just gotten Volo's Guide to Monsters, and the Bodak filled that bill perfectly. And so, and I think the illustration is really cool. It did what I needed it to do when I needed it to do it, and so I dig that one. That one's always going to be in pocket for me.
It's a good choice. You mentioned it was kind of a blog that you started and then it turned into books that you published. So I wanted to ask about the process of converting a blog into a book. Did you find that you had to do a lot of reworking of what you had written, or was it pretty easy to kind of compile it as such?
It did require a fair amount of revision because, well, for starters, oftentimes one of the things I do with the blog is when I make mistakes, and I make plenty, I always leave the mistake on the blog. I just strike it out and, insert replacement text, because I want to send that message that this is kind of an ongoing learning experience for all of us. And I'm not infallible.
Right.
And if somebody helps me out, points out a mistake I made, I'm going to say, okay, yeah, I made a mistake. Here's the correction. I fix my mistakes in public. That's just sort of something that as a matter of principle for me is very important to do. Now, of course, once you get to the book, all of those things are now incorporated into the text. And I'm lucky to have an editor who also plays D&D 5th edition and will call me on what seems to him like a mistake, or will ask me to clarify something or show my work,
Yeah.
and make sure that the recommendations that I'm giving really are fully sound and valid. So that has been a big help. And also for each book, I'm contractually obligated to add a certain number of words of original material. So there's always going to be things in the books that are not on the blog. And the process for that is the same. I'm just writing the material from scratch. But being able to write the books over a long period of time and then compile them and then just add however much additional material I need to have is very helpful. I did not have the benefit of that with the most recent book that I have been working on, which I'll talk about
Yeah.
a little bit toward the end. And boy, that book kicked my butt. It took so long to write. Way longer than I meant it to. And unfortunately, the blog has kind of gone dead in the meantime. As soon as I get my by the time people are listening to this, hopefully I have gotten my new banner art and done my site redesign, and I'm publishing regularly again.
Cool. Yeah, well, we have that to look forward to then. So next up is a question from one of my patrons, which is, how do you suggest keeping track of really complex abilities in combat? This is from one of my patrons who's actually one of my friends who just ran a game for us recently where we fought this nasty Draco Lich with, tons of different options and legendary actions and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, he just wants to know, lots of abilities, legendary actions, tracking minions and other creatures that are around it. What are some tips that you have for streamlining those types of combats and then combat in general?
So the number one tip I'm going to give is make as many choices as you can in advance of your game session. And in fact, that is the mentality, the motivation behind the entire blog. When you are DMing, you are keeping track of so many moving parts, that you are not going to make the best decisions you can if you have to try to make all those decisions on the fly. You want to do as much of your thinking as you possibly can in the preparation phase before your game session ever starts, before your combat encounter ever starts. You want to make as many decisions as possible yourself.
Hmm.
And so the main point of the monsters know what they're doing is to say, here is how these monsters are going to fight. This is what they're going to do. These are the powers they're going to use and the circumstances under which they're going to use them. So I have done this work for you, or I've done it for myself because I use it the same way. I use my own work that way. Here's what you need to know. Write it down in whatever form of note taking is easy for you to read and process on the fly. Okay. Write yourself a few little if then statements if you need to. If the paladin does this, then do that. If the party try to go through this place, do this. Whatever. Nail down the sequence, nail down those decision points, figure out what the result of each of those decision points is going to be. Choice A, choice B, this happens, that happens. Script it out for yourself beforehand. Make a little flow chart if that's how you roll.
Yeah.
And then when you are in the encounter itself, you can be more present, you can pay more attention to what the players are doing and saying, and you are not now risking making grossly suboptimal decisions because you're under pressure.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right, the next question I put in here, and it's about homebrewing monsters. Do you do that frequently, or do you kind of stick to the stat blocks?
I don't do it a lot.
Okay.
I do it once in a while. And I usually only do it when there isn't already something published that will work.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll get an idea like, oh, they went to the Feywild and they are doing things for this archfey named Iwatari, and she sours on them. And so now they're fleeing. They're trying to get out of her realm and they're being pursued by her champions. I'll homebrew the champions to give them something interesting that's going to challenge each player in the party. Or I have a concept of this artificer. Well, now he's making these armaments and these constructs. I have to decide what the constructs are going to be. I'll do a little home brewing with that kind of stuff. But mostly I try to remix what's already published.
Welcome to Quickfire Chaos! Welcome to Quickfire Chaos. This week, Keith and I are going to use some random generators online to pick a level, a difficulty, and a setting which we'll use to create a totally original encounter. To start off, do we want to limit ourselves to a specific range of levels of players, or do we want to roll randomly for that as well?
Oh, I don't know. Let's see where it takes us.
Okay. Then we'll start off with that, which is just roll a d20 and let's see what level of party we've got here. We'll assume 4 players, right. Just kind of standard party size.
I rolled 4.
Okay, a level 4 party. Okay, now a d4 for whether it's going to be easy, medium, hard, or deadly.
All right, this one's going to be easy. This is a 1.
Okay, an easy encounter. All right, next, a d8 for where we're setting this encounter.
All right, I rolled a 2.
Okay, that's going to be forest. All right, and then it's how many monsters we want to add. So I'm thinking it's kind of like got a minimum and a maximum selection. So let's stick to like a D8 and just see where that lands us for max monsters.
All right, I got 3.
Okay. So you can add up to 3 monsters, and you're designing something relatively easy for 4 level 4 characters in a forest. So what comes to mind if you're going to put something together for this?
Well, I think that if it's going to be that easy, I'm going to play it for comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking for something a little bit silly. Silly plus forest leads me to think maybe goblins, but like more of the clownish variety rather than the deadly variety.
Right, jump from behind the tree and stab you in the back variety.
Or maybe Fey. Fey would be good, silly plus forest. They're level 4. Depending on the forest, level 4 would be a good level at which to have an encounter with a unicorn.
It could.
Or maybe a couple of centaurs. I guess we decided there are going to be 3 of these, right?
Up to 3, yeah.
Up to 3, yeah. There's not going to be 3 unicorns, definitely, but maybe 3 centaurs. Satyrs.
Ooh.
Yeah, we're gonna take 3. They're gonna be going through the forest, and there's gonna be some satyrs drinking around a fire. we'll see how we'll see where the social interaction takes it from there. That would be a good fun one. Now, if I wanted to make it a little bit darker, I noticed that Vine Blight also falls into this range. So if I wanted to just give a sense of we're entering a section of the forest that's spookier here, and I just wanted to give them a taste of the spooky before they're facing any real challenges. Vine Blights would be good for that.
A sign of what's to come. Yeah. I love
Yes, exactly.
I love blights.
Harbinger.
Yeah. Okay, so would it be like they bed down for the night and then all of a sudden the vine blights, ambush them, so to speak? Or would it be something else, do you think?
No, I think they would just. I think this is something that happens near the beginning of the adventuring day. They just stumble through some Vine Blight territory, and the Vine Blights. Do they have natural camouflage?
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Like that? Yeah, they've got false appearance. When they're motionless, they're indistinguishable from a tangle of vines. So I think they're just hiding out amid the foliage, and
they're hacking through.
PCs,
having to bushwhack through, and then all of a sudden.
The PCs are marching through, and suddenly the entangling plants are growing up around them, and they're getting tangled up, and then the Vine Blights move in to strike.
Excellent. I love it. All right. The last couple questions here. First one is your parting words of wisdom and encouragement to new and aspiring DMs and GMs, and I will add on to the end of that perhaps also authors or writers who are kind of in the TTRPG space. Your advice to them.
My advice to DMs, remember, you do not need to know everything. It is not. I'm speaking from my experience as a copy editor, which I did for many, many years. You don't need to know everything. What you need is that little alarm that goes off in your head and tells you when you need to look something up. And then you need to know where to look it up and what to look it up in and where to find it. So I would say to new DMs, do not expect yourself to know every single rule. Don't sweat that. But prepare yourself. Know what rules exist and how they are arranged in the books, in the core books, and know where to find them when you need them. Stick some Post-it notes in if that helps you. I have been engaging with this now long enough that I associate all the chapters of the core books with their topics. So I know, for example, in the Player's Handbook, classes are chapter 3. Backgrounds are chapter 4. Gear is chapter 5. Feats and multiclassing are chapter 6. Ability scores are 7. And adventuring is chapter 8. Combat is chapter 9. Spellcasting is chapter 10. In the Dungeon Master's Guide, I know that the encounter building table is in chapter 3. I know that all the treasure is in chapter 7. All of the stuff about all of the extra tables that you didn't realize you needed until the situation came up, those are all in chapter 8. And in fact, in my copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide, they are all within a few pages of page 249. And so anytime I'm looking for one of those things, I open up to page 249 and flip because I know it's there somewhere within a couple of pages. All of the stuff about homebrewing is in chapter 9. So, or optional rules like being able to disarm, being able to overrun, tumble, those things. So, if there happens to be a rule that I'm blanking on or something I want to check the wording on, I know exactly where to open my books to find that stuff. And nowadays, when so much of my gaming is online by virtue of necessity, one of the things I really like about D&D Beyond is how systematic its URLs are, because it means I can go to the URL bar in my browser and just start typing the name of a monster, and my browser remembers the last time I looked it up, and it takes me straight to that particular monster page. Or I can do the same thing with a spell. I can type DMG or XGTE or TCOE, and it's going to take me to my digital copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide or Xanathar's or Tasha's. So I can go straight to the table of contents with that, or I can start typing a keyword like, if I start typing ADV, it's going to take me to Adventuring Gear, which is Chapter 5 of the Player's Handbook, so I can look up a price. Knowing those shortcuts so that you can look things up very quickly, super helpful. And it saves you from having to fret about knowing those things off the top of your head. You don't need to know them off the top of your head. If you're going to memorize anything, if there's anything that you're going to know cold, make it the conditions in Appendix A of the Player's Handbook, because those are a big deal, and those are going to come into play a lot. Know the difference between grappled and restrained. That's a biggie.
I've never heard anyone give this specific advice, so I love it, because everyone, I feel like, says don't look it up, just make a ruling and move on. But you're saying, and I'm not saying
no, look it up, but know where to look it up so
then
that
it's
you're
fast.
not wasting people's time.
I love that. And I'm the same way. I can just Google it very quickly and pull it up very quickly, the same way what your browser has, your history and that kind of thing. So I do similar, and it's because I know what I'm looking for, that I can get to it quickly and not hold everybody up too much. So, but yeah, that's I like that. I like that instead of you just saying, use improv or your own ruling as a crutch until you look it up later, actually, figure out where it is, but just be quick about it. I like that.
I would not make up a ruling on the fly unless I were convinced that a rule didn't already exist somewhere that I could find it.
Yeah, I like that. As far as authors or writers, do you have any specific advice for people out there who are working on those projects?
If you are trying to get a blog off the ground, write about, let's say, 20 posts before you put anything live. I wrote 3 weeks worth of entries before I brought my blog live. And then for the first months when I was writing the blog, I wrote one a day and I posted one a day. So that for a long time, I always had 20 posts lined up waiting to go live, so that people wouldn't just think, oh, where did he go? New blogger, must have quit, I did get derailed a few months into writing the blog by circumstances that upended the world. But for a long time, I was able to publish a new post every single weekday. And that absolutely gave me the foundation to have a blog that people could come back to and use as a reference, because there was enough content on it and it was being posted with enough regularity. And honestly, in fact, the momentum that gave me has sustained me through the periods when I have not been able to post at all or with any regularity when I was posting. Without that solid base of articles to keep me going until the books came out, would have been a failure, probably.
It's funny. This show started initially as a blog, and a few posts in, one of my friends said, "Can we just record the interview instead?" And here we are. All right, you alluded to it earlier. New projects that you're working on. Anything that you want to tell us about? Anything exciting coming up in your projects that you want to plug here?
I'm just about finished with final revisions on my 4th book, which is going to be called How to Defend Your Lair. That book is going to take real-world principles of building security and area defense and apply them to lair construction. So I'm advocating a new approach to dungeon design, in which instead of drawing a map and then populating it with monsters and sprinkling in treasure here and there, I am recommending starting with the owner of the lair and the assets that they are trying to defend, whether that is treasure or something else, and then designing the entire lair around the defense of those assets.
All right. Sounds really interesting. I know that my dungeon design is as you have described, draw some rooms and put some stuff in it. So I'm looking forward to improving that aspect of my game as well. All right. Well, thanks so much, Keith, for being on. Where can people find your work and connect with you on social media?
I am on Twitter at Keith Ammann. My home website is spyandowl.com, and my books are published by Saga Press, an imprint of Simon & Schuster. You can get them at your local independent bookstore, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. If you live in Canada, Indigo. They are available in ebook formats, audiobook formats, and if you would like to order them through your friendly local game store and their distributor does not carry them, you can tell the store that they can order it wholesale through Simon & Schuster distribution.
Excellent. And yes, I have the first copy, or the your first book, and I really love it, and I can't recommend it enough to everybody out there. And like I said, I've had past guests say that your books have been a real influence on them running games. So it's fun to talk to the person who everyone's been talking about so far. Thanks so much for joining us, Keith.
Thanks for inviting me.